Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going over a review of the entire book series of The Witcher. I'm going to try and power through this review as fast as I can because I'm currently outdoors and I think it's about to start raining. And rain and my camera do not mix well. So let's jump straight into it. This is going to be a spoiler-free review. So if you haven't read the book series yet and you're just trying to feel out to see if this sounds like something that you're going to want to dedicate 8 books of your time to, then this really is the video for you. And it will be worth listening to all the good points and all of the negative points because as much as I do love this book series, there are some seriously negative points to this book series, especially in the earlier books. So listen to everything I have to say because you might either find something you really love or you might find something that you really hate. So let's jump straight into this review with probably what most people would consider is the best part of The Witcher, the characters. I think you would be hard-struck to find someone that didn't love the characters in The Witcher. But more than just the characters themselves is the character relationships, or the relationships between the characters. There is such a great dynamic of humor and toxicity and anger, and even just really petty fights that happen when characters travel together for too long. And it just makes these characters feel so engaging and real. But more than just that, there is the character arcs. Most of the characters in this book or in this series go through a dramatic character arc. And especially for Ciri, who you get to watch grow up from like a young little girl to grow up into a full-grown woman. I won't get too far into the characters because honestly it is the best part of the book and I don't want to give away anything that would take away your enjoyment from it. But the main thing I want to get across to you is if you are a character-driven reader, you would be hard-struck to find a better series than The Witcher to give you some serious character work and character-driven stories. But also, on the subject of characters, I have to bring up a negative. These books were first originally written in 1993, when women didn't have the best representation in fantasy stories. And this book really is a great time capsule of showing that. This series has gotten a lot of flack and a lot of bad attention because of how terribly the author writes women. So if that is something that you are particularly sensitive to, then keep that in mind. But in saying that, I did mention this in a lot of my reviews. I did mention the negative way that women are portrayed in these stories. But I feel like I do have to mention that it is more or less in the first 2 or 3 stories. In the next 4 stories, women are written much better. And I have a feeling that in those early 3 books, the author must have gotten a lot of feedback and he must have gotten a lot of flack from it, learnt from his mistakes, and then greatly improved the way that he wrote women. So that is something just to be aware of. The next interesting point about this book is it is really written in 2 very distinct ways. The first 2 stories, The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny, are written as a group of short stories. And it really focuses a lot more on the Witcher, Geralt, doing cool Witcher stuff. Like he goes to a certain place and he will fight a monster or he will solve some problem. And honestly, I really enjoyed the first 2 books a lot more because of the fact that it was a lot more of Geralt doing cool Witcher stuff. Whereas in the next 5 books, or the actual series itself, Geralt does less Witcher stuff in each sequential book. And that brings me on to the question, is it necessary to read the first 2 books, so The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny? Because they are not part of the actual series themselves, people often ask, or people often say that they are not required reading. And I'm here to tell you that yes, they are required reading, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there is a big twist at the end of this series, and if you have not read the first 2 books, then you will not understand that twist at all. So I have no idea why people say that these first 2 books are not required reading, because if you didn't read them, the big dramatic twist at the end wouldn't make any sense at all. And honestly, it doesn't really make sense even when you have the context. It's kind of weird, but I'll touch on that a little later. The next point is that you get a lot of really interesting character introductions, and you find out through this story, Geralt and Yennefer have a really toxic relationship. Like, it is just toxic as all hell, and you don't really understand it, but if you've read the first 2 books, you'll have a better understanding of why they stay around each other even though their relationship is so toxic. I feel like that would bother a lot of people if you didn't know their like kind of history together. But most importantly, in my opinion, the most important reason why you should read the like prequels or whatever you want to call them before you read the actual series is because the first book in the series, Blood of Elves, is actually really boring. Blood of Elves is a lot of setup for the rest of the series, right? And the thing is, generally, if you read a trilogy or if you read, 7 books, whatever that's called, a septology, the first book is usually really, really incredibly interesting and engaging. And then the second book is a lot more of a setup book. It's a lot more building the world, building the enemies, building the characters, but not a lot of really interesting, engaging stuff happens. The issue with The Witcher, however, is Blood of Elves, the first book, is that boring book that builds the world, builds the political system, builds the war effort that's going on, builds the characters, introduces a lot of people. And the author did that because he was expecting you to already have developed a strong relationship and love for Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer and Dandelion. So he knew that he could make Blood of Elves his massive world-building book and there wouldn't be any issues because people were already invested. So just keep that in mind. I would definitely 1000%, I don't even know why people say that it's not required reading. You should definitely read the first 2 stories. But if you've read the series, let me know what you think. Do you think the first 2 books are required reading? Do you think they're not? Let me know in the comments down below, because I do always like to hear what people have to say about that. The next thing I want to bring up kind of links back to the negative way that women were represented in these stories, and that's the really weird way sexuality is portrayed in this series. Again, this is only really present in the first 3 books, but I remember when I was doing my reviews for the series, I took down a lot of notes about how weird sexuality was written in this story, and just the kind of the sexual assault vibe that was just ever present in this story. And I'll give you an example. It's not a spoiler example, so don't stress. But in one of the stories, there's a scene where Geralt, Yennefer, and Dandelion get tied up. They get tied up to a tree or something. And the people that tied them up are going to go and do something. They're going to go and, let's just say they're going to chop down a tree. And that's it, right? They want to chop down the tree before Geralt, Yennefer, and Dandelion chop down the tree. So they tie them up, but just as they're about to leave, one of the guys turns around and walks back over to Yennefer and just rips her top off. So she's standing there with her boobs out. And it was just really weird and unnecessary. And then the guy says a line as he's walking away ooh yeah, we're gonna come back and, blah blah with Yennefer kind of thing. And it's just really unnecessary and rapey. And then on top of that, Dandelion just stares at her the whole time, and then he says some things. And it's just a really uncomfortable, weirdly represented sexual situation that just shouldn't have happened. And the author was kind of writing it yeah, people will be really into this scene. There's Yennefer tied up, all exposed and helpless, and Dandelion saying what we're all thinking. And I mean, I know it was written in a different time. It was written 25 years ago or something. But for me to read it now as a fully grown adult in 2021, it was just really uncomfortable and creepy. And I feel that's definitely worth mentioning if you're particularly sensitive to that kind of stuff. But like I said, it was only really present in the first 3 books, because I have a feeling the author must have got a lot of flack for that. He must have got a lot of feedback, and people were dude, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but it's not coming off as sexy or whatever, it's coming off as creepy as hell. So in the last 4 books, that doesn't really happen. The next thing I want to bring up is the really interesting monsters. The monsters in this world and the way that Geralt deals with them are so interesting. I don't know too much about European mythology or about mythology from Poland, who I believe that's where the author's from. He's Polish. So all of these monsters that he was introducing into these books, I knew nothing about, and every time that he built a new monster, he would describe what it looked like, he would describe its strengths, its weaknesses. through the lens of Geralt, who was a professional monster hunter. So all of the monsters were written in such a very interesting way. But more interesting than the monsters themselves were the ways that Geralt dealt with them. Because one of the really things that caught me by surprise in this book was that it was not just an action-packed Geralt runs around slashing up monsters kind of story. There were just as many monsters that Geralt dealt with in a civilized manner by talking to the monster, or curing the monster of its disease or its ailment, or figuring out why the monster was cursed in the first place. And I thought that was so much more interesting to find out how Geralt would solve these problems as they came up, rather than just hacking and slashing the monsters apart. But that also brings me on to the next negative. This book is actually pretty slow. These books actually do run pretty slow. It's about 50% cool action, or maybe even less. It's probably like 30% action in this book. There is a lot of politics. There's so much slow political movements in these stories. And that was something that I was not expecting at all. I was expecting it to be a lot more warfare. I was expecting it to be a lot more Geralt slashing up monsters and doing cool Witcher stuff. But a fair majority, I would even say at least 50% of this series, is just like slow moving political council meetings. And if you watch my reviews of the Witcher books, you'll see how much I talk about the slow political council meetings. And I hated it. It was so slow and just, I mean, like if you like that kind of thing, it would be really great, because they do a great job of, say, building the world and building the motivations of the countries, which are like the kings. The kings are trying to move their forces to go and do things. There's a lot of great political scheming in the way of, say, human kings trying to do their thing. And then there's like the other races trying to do their thing. And then there's the sorcerers in the middle that are trying to manipulate things for their own gains. So if political intrigue is something that you're interested in, this is a really great story for that. But that also leads me into, there is no map for this series. There is so much description of, say, like armies moving from this place to this place, or, you know, there's a forest and there's like elves living in it and they're doing like their own thing, or humans have come from here to go over here. There's a lot of like geographical descriptions of moving places. And to kind of give you an example, they might say something along the lines of, the army of Kaladin is moving from the Shanghai Peninsula. They're traveling through the Valley of Bunnies, and they should be on the River Morrow by 3 days' time. And I have no map, so I have no way to reference that, right? Like, is the Valley of Bunnies particularly hard to get through? Is it particularly easy to get through? Is it the most straightforward path? Is it the most out-of-the-way path? Were you expecting that? Were you not expecting that? And I feel like a book that relies so much on its political movements and the movements of soldiers and the movements of Geralt through the world should have a map. Like, there's definitely enough description of the world in the story to build a map, so it's weird that there is no map to the series. There are a lot of fan-made maps online, but there is no official map. So if that's something that would bother you, just keep that in mind. The last point I want to touch on with the Witcher series is the humor. There is a lot of just dry humor in this book, and it is so great. There are so many scenes that just make you laugh in this story because you care about the characters so much, and because they get pissy with each other over like little things, or something big and dramatic will happen and someone will have something funny to say. And it's so easy in a story like this, where there's warfare, where there's racism, and where there's a lot of violence. It's so easy to turn a story like this into something grim and dark and humorless. So to have the characters unexpectedly say something funny or do something funny really helps to lighten this book, and a lot of people will tell you the humor in this story is one of its best parts. Apparently it's better in the original Polish versions, but I can't read that language, so I wouldn't know. Anyways, guys, that's all I got for you today. I'm so glad the rain didn't come, so that was really nice. Please like this video, comment down below any thoughts you have about the Witcher series, subscribe to the channel. I just hit 1,000 subscribers, by the way, so thank you everyone that subscribed. I do really appreciate that. And as always, thank you very much.